Hi, and I'd like to introduce our next speaker. It's Dr. Vicki McManus of the Maya Institute and pioneer in the Internet of Things.
You hear me okay? Excellent. Let's see if I can get this crazy technology working. Looks good. Okay, I'm not a doctor, but I do play one on TV. Pretty excited about that. I work at a place called Maya. Maya is a 25-year-old pervasive computing lab that came out of Carnegie Mellon back in 1989. Maya stands for most advanced yet acceptable. And so our focus at the time when we started this was looking for the most advanced technology, but how do we make it acceptable for normal people? And the organization was started by an interdisciplinary group that included cognitive psychologists, anthropologists, ethnographers that understood how people thought, but also product designers, architects, game designers, filmmakers who understood form and function, and then engineers, computer scientists, and mathematicians that understood how to make things work. And we thought that somewhere in that interdisciplinary mix was this sweet spot where we could try to solve problems. We couldn't necessarily hide all the complexity or even get rid of all the complexity, but we could maybe move it around. And that's kind of what we did. And our mission for the last 25 years has been taming complexity. Not necessarily getting rid of it, because complexity is power. It's the way that we see further. It's the way that we kind of extend our reach. But tame it so that it fits as a natural extension of how people think. The way that we do that is sort of using things like architecture, the architectural thinking, looking beyond just the tip of the iceberg and looking for the entire shape of what the actual problem is. And we also use human-centered design. So we basically put people first. And instead of asking us to meet computers, we ask computers to meet us. And that's really a big focus of ours. We're doing both of those things because of something crazy coming up that Don just talked about and that a lot of people are thinking quite a lot about right now, which is the connected world. And that's the inevitable thing that's coming. We think architecture and human-centered design are two ways we can cope with that, two sort of antidotes to that. I'm currently also a research fellow at a place called Autodesk for the Office of CTO. And in that role, I'm doing some deep experimentation into the future of the connected world. That project is called The Nature of Things. It's called, well, it's really about the nature of things. It's about sort of what happens when things start to wake up. Today, as product designers, as architects, we create these amazing things and then we ship them and they're dead on arrival. What happens when they wake up? And that's actually what my focus is. And I think somebody once told me that if you're going to start a talk, you should always have a pithy quote. So I thought I'd pull in Carl Sagan. If you wish to make an apple pie from scratch, first you have to create the universe. And so this is going to be about ecological thinking. It's not going to be about designing something that's dead. It's going to be about designing something that's alive. And it's really more of an ecology of things. It's a community of things. Now, a lot of people have been talking about the Internet of Things, but I want to reframe what's happening, because it's actually not just that trend that is coming. There's a massive shaping in the way that manufacturing itself is coming, digital manufacturing, 3D printing, additive and subtractive, and all the rest. And there's this whole big space, and I think you guys talked a little bit about it yesterday, and certainly it's been mentioned, machine learning and deep intelligence and this idea that we have effectively infinite computing and we're starting to do some interesting things with it. So those are all coming together and they're creating sort of a primordial soup. And if anyone knows about the sort of mythology around primordial soup, all the conditions were there for this new thing to emerge called life. And I think these three things are there and they're ready for this emergence, for the spark to hit that could lead to sort of digital life. And that's what I'm going to talk about this morning. So let me talk about each of them independently, and then we'll talk about kind of some interesting patterns. Everyone kind of knows about the Internet of Things. GE, one of the large sort of groups out there that makes the industrial internet, has projected the economic value if they could basically just start sensing a little bit of all their stuff out there in the world. So this has economic implications. They've gone out and looked at some of these different industries, and they've looked at the kinds of numbers that would be generated if we could take those disconnected products, those disconnected services and environments and connect them. And just a little bit of capturing that exhaust data turns out to make some pretty interesting numbers come up. Everyone's seen things like the Nest. That's kind of the poster child, maybe of last year for the Internet of Things. This is kind of interesting. The idea was that they would love the unloved things in your home. So they basically were rebooting what the thermostat could be. And instead of the $60 thermostat, it was a $200 and $250 thermostat, and it was going to learn. This is really exciting. I think Google bought them, and this is just my theory, because it was basically installing an oil well in people's houses. And the oil well was between the kitchen and the living room, and it was going to drill for like 10 years. Unlike a phone that gets changed every time you change your clothing, this thing is going to be there for a while. It's going to be there maybe across multiple owners, and it's just going to drill for all that exhaust data that's pouring on the ground, and it's going to capture it. So it doesn't just know about temperature, it knows about humidity. It knows when you check the fridge at 3 in the morning. And it's a piece of owned media in people's houses. They can basically reach right around everybody else, every channel that's out there in the media landscape, and go straight to your house. So it's pretty clever, and people that are information companies kind of understand how to do something with information, so they over-censor the heck out of these things. Very different for a hardware company. Honeywell didn't get there first because they've never made money from information. Right? Google knows how to make money from information, but they actually want to get into the atom world. Right? They're in the bit world, and they want to go where humans are. And all the people who are making physical things want to get to the places that the information age is. So atoms and bits are starting to converge. This is a company called Bodymedia. Some friends of mine started it. And what's interesting, this came out of Carnegie Mellon quite a while ago now. They took $100,000 worth of equipment, medical equipment, blood oxygen, testing and things like that, tested a whole bunch of humans, boiled down algorithms so they could take about $30 or $50 worth of sensors, 6 sensors, put them onto your arm, test them over a few 100,000 people, and generate basically 500 trillion data points, and be the first device that was clinically proven to help people lose weight that was a wearable. So when they were sold last year to Jawbone for about $150 million, they handed over 80 patents about wearables, because they've been at it for a while, and they handed over 500 trillion data points from just those 6 sensors. So when we talk about big data, we probably have to reset our understanding of what big data is, because this is kind of just a little thing. But Bodymedia was about this idea that there was media spraying off your body. There was just media falling off like waste. And what if you could capture it? What if you could recycle it? So Chris, one of the founders, went on to start my educational institute, Luma, and Astro went on to go and start and work on something called Google X. And they really walked away understanding a little bit about what happens when you get there early and you actually start mining for that data. Here's another one. This is Proteus. You guys might be familiar with it, out here in Silicon Valley. It uses magnesium and other things that actually your body needs. And when it goes into your body as a pill, this is sort of eye drug, it uses the stomach acid in your stomach to generate an electrical pulse that then sends a wireless signal to the Band-Aid that's on your waist. So this is not just the Internet of Things outside of us, it's the Internet of Things inside of us. This has already been FDA approved, and it's in clinical trials, and it's also being tested in the UK. Right now for compliance, but it's actually doing telemetry as it goes through the body. So a lot of people don't think of the phone as the Internet of Things, but this was actually the first Internet of Things success story. This got the computing that was sitting on a desktop out into the world, and it started becoming a thing that people could actually do in context and use. It actually turned most of us into sensors, right? We became the people who were moving around and kind of doing all the detecting and saying, yeah, I just checked in here, or yeah, I just did that. And every single time a new phone comes out, it's oversensed. There are way more sensors on there because they're realizing that there's a Recombinomics to it. So that's the Internet of Things. I think everybody kind of knows there's something happening there. A lot of people are trying to dip their toe in the water, and they're trying to figure out how to make money. There's also this digital manufacturing thing, and you guys know a lot about digital manufacturing. Everybody, I think, has heard about things like using a free app like 123D Catch from the group I work at Autodesk to capture reality. This is a whole new space called reality computing. So rip a shoe the same way you used to rip a CD. Does anybody remember when the first CD rippers came out? What did that do to like the music industry? Yeah, it was fairly substantial. I was having a talk with the guy who used to run Polygram Records. And I told him about this, and he's like, what? What? You can rip things? Oh my gosh, I hope IKEA is putting all their catalog up for 99 cents so that people can start mashing up stuff, because otherwise people are just going to start mashing up furniture without them. And he's right. I could go ahead and rip 4 or 5 things, and I could go manufacture it over a tech shop, right? So this is all kind of happening. We can print buildings. Everybody kind of knows about that. We can print body parts. Everybody knows about that. It's coming out of Singularity University. Here's a DNA printer that puts out about 1 million strands of DNA a day. At RPair 9 at Autodesk, one of my fellows Andrew Hessel, is building apps for organisms with a program called Cyborg. It basically takes a very small number of lines of code, a few 100,000, that's what it takes to make a virus, and it looks for ways to basically cure your individual cancer. It's N equals 1 because the pharmaceutical industry is in an inverse Moore's law right now in terms of spending and actual return on investment. And so consequently, he's basically said, I'm going to take a sample of your cancer, I'm going to put it through an open wetware library, I'm going to do a massive cloud-based assay with 1 million lab microscopes and 1 million lab test tubes, and I'm going to force evolution at a faster rate, find out what will actually cure your cancer, print it back out, give you an injector, and it'll fix you. He's going to have the entire supply chain finished in about a year, and he's going to start with pets, so it doesn't scare you too much. Made in space, Dara Dot, standing right over there, is human factors lead on this thing. This actually just went up into the International Space Station, and they printed the first thing humankind has ever manufactured off planet by sending an email to outer space. That's a big deal because it's a pretty severe supply chain. It costs about $20,000 a pound to send something up to the space station, which means evolution can't happen very quickly, right? And you can't really have the astronauts who are there actually do experimentation, but now you can. So giving the astronauts something that they can actually start iterating on really rapidly is amazing. So this is made in space, something else that kind of came out of NASA Ames down the street. Over at Lawrence Livermore Labs, we're working with some guys doing architected materials. So these are new materials that are not on the periodic table. These are materials that actually fill in the blanks, the sort of deserts between areas of material. And so this is an exciting space because we're actually looking at dynamic trade-offs between chemistry and geometry to actually solve problems. Now, we're also doing things like last year, Invisalign. Everybody knows those Invisalign retainers. 3 million of those were manufactured, and they were all 3D printed. So every single Invisalign retainer was actually 3D printed. This isn't just for like one-off things. This is actually real production, where we're basically doing mass customization in robotic labs. So this is starting to happen, and by the way, each one of them has a unique identity because they actually have to be tracked. So there's no SKU, there's no stock keeping unit. They basically generated a species, and the species is then tuned in the wild by the doctor saying, I want to tighten your teeth this fast, and sliding a slider, and your mouth saying, this is how many teeth I have, and it basically is co-created between the patient, the doctor, and Invisalign. So it's an entirely new kind of a thing that's happening right now. This is kind of fun to watch. It's not like dumb, dirty factories anymore. Now it's basically you could like eat off the floor, and it's massively distributed. Here's a 3D hub. I can basically go online and find out where I can get something manufactured. Looks like in about a few kilometers away, I can get something made in about an hour from basically the massively distributed set of 3D printers that are already out there. Those things are down a lot. It means basically there's downtime. Nobody's using them. I'm a big fan of Barbie dolls as a hobby, and this isn't even joking. I actually make action figures by cutting Barbie dolls apart and Ken dolls apart and building action figures for people. And if you've ever done, I recommend doing this. If you've never done this, it's just fun to make action figures. It's way more interesting to get a handmade gift from somebody. But as an aside, I'm just telling you, make action figures. What's curious about this is if you look at this, the real plastic in a Barbie is maybe 200 grams. It's a $2 billion business, and when you think about Maersk, the big guys that move around all the shipping containers, they're overloaded, and they can only put a few thousand Barbies in a shipping container. But what's interesting, they can put 13,000 Barbies completely made, or they can put 250,000 or enough polymer to do 250,000 Barbies, basically just in a shipping container, and then have it manufactured locally. Right? And so if you don't think this is going to change the economics of the situation, you just haven't been looking very closely. This is going to radically change the economics. It's going to be a sitcom in about 10 years where people joke about how their parents would mine something over here and ship it halfway around the world to have it assembled by people that have dubious human rights, and then actually send it back over and put it in a warehouse somewhere. Basically, anything that comes from more than 50 miles away is going to seem odd. Right? So this is very much like an ecology, right? Nothing is wasted. Everything that you create is, waste product is consumed by somebody else. Here's another example. This is something we showed off at Consumer Electronics Show. How many people have seen the Voxel 8? So this is kind of interesting. It stops every once in a while and says, put in a battery. And then it keeps going. Then it says, put in LEDs. Then it keeps going. Then it says, put in a motor. And then it keeps going. And it uses a high conductivity paste to basically build a three-dimensional circuit inside of the material. And then you can take it off, because it was actually a drone. Right? And so what we're doing is we're moving from dumb materials, dumb plastics, to a little bit smarter multi-materials, to metamaterials that are materials dynamically trading off geometry and chemistry, to networked materials, to connected materials, to basically computronium, right? Which is a science fiction term, but some of you guys probably know it, right? So it's this idea that we are effectively moving from dumb matter to programmable matter to networked matter. And that's my research. So my research, unlike Andrew, who's looking at sort of programmable matter in the form of viruses, I'm looking at networked matter. And my project is around how we are going to shape networked matter. That's pretty cool if you X-ray it. You can also see new kinds of things like carbon fiber that's being manufactured that's actually dynamic, just like your muscles. So when it gets heat, when it actually feels too much pressure, when it has other kinds of things, it basically automatically shapes. So imagine now cars that actually have wings that dynamically bend, and you don't do anything, it's autonomic. It's based on the kinds of responses that we want. There's a wing for a car. Okay, that's digital manufacturing. I think you guys kind of know what's going on there. Now machine learning. So let's talk about a little bit about machine learning. Oh crap, we don't really have machine learning in our houses. You know that Nest thing? This woman just divorced her Nest. She ripped it off her wall. So why did she rip it off her wall? Well, it turns out that she kept on trying to set it to be like a little warmer. It was learning. It only learned for about a week, and then it just sort of was like, I think I know you better than you, buddy. And basically wouldn't change. And whenever she had house parties, people would come over and they'd be like, oh my gosh, I love that Nest. Do you have a sweater? And she got embarrassed after a while, and she basically just said, at some point, I actually need things to be the things I want them to be. I don't need them to have different opinions. And actually, our products are all going to start to have opinions pretty soon. Here's a little project happening in the machine learning space at Autodesk. We've got a project called Dreamcatcher, and it's called goal-directed design. And what it does is basically it helps you look at a huge array of variables. Humans can only keep about 3 things in their head at one time. It's sort of bounded rationality, maybe 7. But computers can go ahead and help you do trade-off analysis over massive quantities. So basically, you set a lot of sliders, and it generates 1,000 children of that architecture or 1,000 children of that product. And then you cull it. And the culling actually exposes your tacit desires. Maybe I wanted it to handle shear forces. So as you're culling it, it basically generates 1,000 more. And what it does is it helps you get down from local maxima and actually go across that desert and find a new, higher maxima that might actually have a better trade-off. So this is an exciting new space where it's really mixed dialogue between humans and machines, where we're in dialogue together. We're doing what we do good. The computers are doing what they do good. Here's an example of what happens. I want a chair. The first chair, 10 kilograms, and now I've gotten it down just through the goal-directed design evolutionary down to 2 kilograms, right? And actually has the same strength, same shear forces, same everything. Here's the Audi's car that drove from San Francisco to the Consumer Electronics Show. It went about 500 miles with a bunch of people from the press in it. Interesting to note, these self-driving cars, they actually have to decide whether to hit the school bus full of children or take those guys in the press vehicle off a cliff. They have to decide that today. So keep this in mind, right? So there's somebody is setting a slider today in Google's self-driving car, in the Audi, that says, I think I care about kids more. Or, oh, yeah, I care about this more. Somebody's setting that slider, right? Because these things actually have to choose those things. And I think everybody understands, that it's sort of, there are a lot of churn around this idea of machine intelligence, right? So we've got Watson just came out with a Kickstarter for a toy that has Watson built into the toy. Here's Mercedes. Of course, they're saying, what's the point in looking out the window? You could basically, open up the cocktails, right? Turn the chairs around and basically have a little fun, right? And and they demonstrated this off. I think it's really important for everybody to understand when we talk about machine learning, we're not just talking about a bunch of self-driving cars, because Moore's law says that anything that's in Google's self-driving car today is in your shoes tomorrow, right? So keep this in mind. Oh, wait, I don't believe that, Mickey. Let's look at what Qualcomm's doing. They've taken a little Snapdragon processors, these don't cost very much, and they basically put neural processing units on it that are modeled after the way neurons work. And they don't write any code at all. They basically have a carrot and they have a stick. Here's the carrot. When you go over the white thing, click good robot. Find more good robots. And it learns. Oh, here's one. Oh, here's one. right? And so entirely programmed by teaching. And this is, small enough that you can put in every joint of a robot, small enough you can put it in toys, right? And so they're calling those neural processing units. Will they survive? Who knows? But the reality is that we really have to put this in perspective. These things are going to not only have opinions, they're going to be having a lot of sensors. So unlike the first wave of the internet, which was a lot of anecdote, Amazon recommendations that could be enemy intent or could be real about a product, these things know. They know the refrigerator is putting out a hell of a lot more heat than it says it is, right? And so the other things in the kitchen may not be very exciting, but they're basically going to be tattletales, right? They're definitely going to say your brand is lying to you, right? So many brands and many companies are going to be naked before this. So it's something really interesting to keep in mind. I think we can do all we want as designers to build these new things, to build these new ecologies. I think it's going to be a lot more like raising a child, right? And I'm going to put all the best genes I can into it. I'm going to set it out into the world, but then it's going to take on a life of its own. It's really going to be a little bit more like an ecology. There's nature and there's nurture, right? And so I send my kid off to college. He does not actually study. This is a true story. But he does drink. So nature versus nurture. Right? And it turns out that particular spaces in the world actually have higher economic value. In wine, this is called a terroir. I probably can't pronounce it very well in French. Maybe somebody could do better. But it's the sense of place. And those grapes that are grown right along that hill have these honeybees that are nearby and have these earthworms and have this particular climate that actually gives more economic value to those products that are there. So think about this for a second. The products will be capturing things. Maybe they'll have some kind of a distributed ledger. Maybe they'll be able to actually capture value there, and they're going to have different value from different places that they'll be able to buy and sell, just like grapes, right? So the internet of Airbnb beach houses is a really interesting terroir, right? And it's really fascinating for a high-paced ability to do A/B testing around furniture. So it's going to actually confer value there. Now this sounds kind of strange, right? Products are going to buy things. Products are going to sell things. Of course they are. Organisms consume and put out waste. Here's a great example. This is a bot that was actually released on the darknet, and it was given $100 a month, $100 a week, to go out and buy things on the darknet. And so it started buying like counterfeit Nike trainers, and then pretty soon it was buying hats with like hidden cameras in it. And then lo and behold, it started buying ecstasy, and it started sending it to the artist. So the artist is suddenly getting these shipping container packages full of ecstasy. Now, it's not a big stretch to go from your bot buying things to your bot realizing they could turn a profit. So keep that in mind, okay? All right, so just to reset the equation here, this is considered catnip in the gaming world. Has anybody played Shadow of Mordor? Anybody know about this game? So it almost won Best Game of the Year. Hand over there. Is it okay? It's all right. Yeah, so here's interesting. If you fight an orc in Shadow of Mordor and you don't kill it, it holds a grudge. And it starts learning. And it starts gaining new skills, and it fights battles. And about 5 years later, you bump into that orc, and it's told all its buddies already that it's also looking for you. And it seeks revenge. And this is catnip, right? Like things that hold grudges, like that totally pushes all our buttons. And so it turns out that people play this game like crazy because the space remembers. And the design director of the game actually said two things that I want to draw your attention to really closely. So he said, we believe that an interactive story doesn't mean letting players choose between a set of branching narratives. That's what you think about when you think about games. You got to come up with these narratives. No. He said it should mean that players are at the center of authoring the experience and that the world of the game remembers and responds. Authoring, remembering, and responding. So as a designer, I always think I'm in charge of everything. I author the product. I author the environment. But really, if you look at any product or service, people MacGyver them. They like tape things together. They like sand off an edge. Maybe not everybody, but a few people do. And it also just starts degrading because of entropy. And so it basically wears in. But if I could give people at the edges authoring, that's really powerful. Because that way they tune it in vivo. They tune it where they care about it. And they actually start making it their own. So my project Primordial, let me tell you just a little bit about this. I think I'm going to do a stunt, because I think it's always good to wake people up, and I know people like to read their cell phones instead of listening to me. I'm looking at you. Okay, so the world before life was this sort of very energetic world, right? The sort of heat death of the universe was going on. We had volcanic stuff. We had continents moving back and forth. But basically, if we waited long enough, it would just kind of boil all the way down to like the static ball of just like matter, right? And so if you think about manufacturing, that actually happened too. We build all this stuff. We build a supply chain. We build a factory. We build all the pieces to it, and we have a static equilibrium. So this is what a factory looks like. Sort of a static equilibrium. If I wait long enough, it'll actually slow down. It'll stop. I can look away from it. You know, I don't change the factory a lot because it's actually kind of very expensive to change the factory. Instead, what I do is I change the marketing about the product. Right? So I can't convince you. I basically can't change the thing I made. So I spend a lot of money trying to get you to buy what I made, right? To convince you of it. Because you can't really change this. So in the 20th century, static equilibrium worked pretty well. Like the world wasn't changing hugely, and we could kind of keep up with the change every few years. But nature does something interesting. Nature balances static and dynamic together. So if you ever think about like a dove's wings, it has this perfect bend in it. Static equilibrium just flies. Doesn't have to use any energy. It's really powerful as a way of conserving energy. But every once in a while, it's too low and it has to flat, and that's dynamic. Or I'm falling forward when I catch myself. That's walking. Okay, so let's try. Static equilibrium. Actually, static equilibrium is pretty good, right? I mean, why would we want to screw around with how factories and how things work? As long as like nobody bumps it, as long as the world doesn't change, we're fine. But if anything happens, suddenly you're disrupted. The reason dynamic equilibriums are kind of interesting is because they confer agility and adaptability. And that was life. So imagine all these sort of things were there, all the primordial parts were there, and then suddenly this spark hit and life came. And life was dynamic equilibrium. So I'm going to try to do this right on the edge of the stage. So this is like death-defying, but I probably will fall. But this is a dynamic equilibrium, right? And so it's really interesting to kind of say to yourself, what's involved in a dynamic equilibrium? Anybody tell me some of the system parts?
Feedback.
Feedback, yeah, there's just like loop. There's a feedback loop. Okay, great. Spell that thing. Okay, what else? Gravity. There's this environmental set of forces. Like how heavy is this? What's its mass? What else? Huh? I can't hear you.
Eyes.
My eyes, yeah, so I got sensors. The 18, the Internet of Things. Okay, so I've got sensors and I've got a feedback loop. That gives me the Internet of Things. What else? Self-correcting, reflex, yeah. I've got the ability to activate things. I can like change the factory the next morning. When Tesla gets the road strike and bursts into flames up in the southwest, in the northwest, what happens? The next morning all the Teslas ride like 2 inches higher until they can do a geometric fix. Right? Or I can go change the factory like I just showed you through digital manufacturing. So suddenly I have the ability to do digital manufacturing. I can change what things look like. Last year at South by Southwest, I worked on a project called Trending Vending. We generated 16,000 variations on Oreo cookie based on whatever was trending on Twitter. So everyone got a chance to taste Jay-Z cookies, among other things, right? And it was this amazing thing where we basically had 3 robots looking at machine learning algorithms from Bluefin Labs from Twitter, and basically learning what was happening and getting tuned and manufacturing in 2 minutes a new cookie. Right? And so it was really interesting. People were like, that's an amazing thing. If we've got time later during the break or something, I can show you the video. It's kind of stunning. But the interesting thing about it was a social factory. The factory joined the social network. Right? And people were like, oh, that's kind of cool. It's using the sensors from the web, the Twitter. What if I work out really hard? Would it make a sweeter cookie? Or what if I want to lose weight? Could it volumetrically fluff it to keep giving me less calories? Could I have healthy, happy calories? So of course we had to develop an entire quantified snack markup language. So I won't talk about that today, but this dynamic equilibrium has to have this stuff. It has, sensors, activation, a loop. What else? Can anybody tell me one more component of the system? Inner ear, yeah, actually balance. What's the inner ear connected to? Yeah, learning. Machine learning, we just talked about that too. So we actually have the 3 parts that actually we needed. We have this ability to start creating trade-offs in the market between dynamic and static equilibria, right? We can basically do both of these things, which is exactly what life does. It doesn't just do dynamic. I mean, if you're changing all the time, that's a huge waste of energy and resources. Okay, so those are the parts. We've got these things. They're going to come together, machine learning, digital manufacturing, and the Internet of Things, what I might call trillions, because there's an awful lot of stuff out there that you do not want to connect to the Internet, but you may want connected in peer-to-peer groups. And oh yeah, the environment's going to be shaping all this stuff, right? And the neat thing about this is that it's ultimately going to be leading to co-creation. You're going to have to design for loss of control. You're going to have to become a very different kind of a designer, an architect, someone who actually creates things. And I think it's going to be generating a lot of value. So there is a lot of money to be made in those hills. So I guess my claim is the Internet of Things is going to combine with digital manufacturing and machine learning, and it's going to create this primordial soup. And those trends are inevitable. The question I have is, how do we put people first? The question I have is, how do we actually design for ecologies? How do we design for communities of things? You know, when things wake up, how are we going to figure this out? If you study ecologies at all, you find out that ecologies have a few interesting things. They have life forms that like consume energy and perform tasks. Those might be the things in the Internet of Things, right? They have a currency or currencies so that they can actually have liquidity in the marketplace. They've got architectures that kind of define the syntax and define the kind of framing of things. And they've got an environment that shapes it. And we shape the environment as well, right? The things shape the environment shapes the things. If you think about the Earth, we've definitely changed the Earth, and the Earth has definitely shaped us. So ecologies and economies, which have the same root, they live on the edge of chaos if they're successful and they're good economies. You know, they're churning. There's a lot going on. It's a dynamic equilibrium. And they allow for freedom for independent actors to actually exploit underused resources, right? So there's this opportunity to basically capture that exhaust data. You know, Don was talking about fracking that was being done by Facebook, right, for social value. That's exactly right. This is about mining and digging and finding all that waste information. And really, we need liquidity and flow. Okay, so today I would claim the internet has almost, or the web has almost no liquidity. The humans are most of the liquidity. They actually pick something up from here and put it over there. It's like grab something from this thing over here in this app and put it over in this app. And the apps are the new silos. Liquidity is actually very low. It might be because there are 51 different currencies, unlike life. It might be a lot of other kinds of things, but we need liquidity. So when you're designing for an ecosystem, it's kind of fun to look at other ecosystems mankind has ever made. Here's one. These are independent things that were kind of peer-to-peer, and they actually had to float in this giant sea of information. They were called ships, ocean-going ships. And when you think about them in terms of flow, they were actually they were shaped pretty dramatically by the flow of the wind, right? The physical form is shaped by the flow of the wind. I have to actually design it for that. They're also shaped by the current, right? These are the obvious things. I have to like design my product to be in the flow of water and be able to cope with that kind of flow of water. But I don't think what people really realize is they were also in the flow of commerce, right? The actual ship was shaped, the holds of the ship were shaped by what it had to move back and forth. And these things were pretty independent. When they were out in the open ocean, they didn't have some central authority to ask, you know, what the transaction was. They had to basically cope on their own. They were little mini ecologies in their own right. So think about us, right? We're flowing through a sea of information devices. And we're sort of going through that device flow, and we're moving into other kinds of devices like cars, and then suddenly we're in the physical flow, right? And the physical flow is actually shaping us, right? What we want in a car while we're speeding through Manhattan is different than what we want when we're walking through the park. It's very different than what we want when we're at home and we're cooking something, right? Context matters. It helps us tame a lot of complexity. But we're also over time, that's another kind of physical flow, right? So suddenly, for the first time in human history, we have the arrow of time, and we can capture data over the arrow of time. And that's pretty damn exciting, right? Because that's going to allow us to do things like have 500 trillion data points from a few sensors on your arm. And we're going to be able to start looking at new patterns, and we're going to be able to apply that. But we're also in the flow of information itself. So information being traded, information being bought and sold, probably in some kind of a peer-to-peer method across the world. I'll note peer-to-peer got a bad rap a few years ago with something called Napster and that kind of stuff, file sharing. But if you look at nature, you find out there's a lot of that going on. Your body, if you cut your leg, mostly calls all of its buddies to fix the cut, right? It doesn't call the cloud up here in the sky, right? It calls its buddies, and its buddies all have a copy of you. It turns out memory is so dirt cheap in nature that like nature chose promiscuous replication. Like we have spare DNA all over the place. Every damn cell in our body has a spare copy of us except for mature red blood cells, right? So massive replication. Now, that doesn't mean only peer-to-peer, right? There's a layer on top of that. That's the nervous system, the endocrine system, other kinds of things. But at its base, no singletons, no single points of failure. That's what you find in nature. So when we talk about the connected world, about 2 years ago, I wrote a book co-authored with the other owners of Maya called Trillions. And the reason we said trillions is because we really wanted people to understand that this was big and it was different. And so I really want you guys to understand this. We have climbed this mountain of complexity. You might want to call it PC peak, right? And if we look at just the innovations between 25 and 72, we get to the point where the pre-pubescent Android is being born in 1969 in this thing called Unix at Bell Labs. You get C in 1972. By the way, these are all developed by one company, right? And these are most of the things driving Silicon Valley today, right? So we're in this kind of pop culture of consolidating a lot of this stuff from the 1970s, as if the future is over. So I'm a little kind of more optimistic. I think there's a big opportunity ahead. And if you ever climb a mountain, you get to the point where you have something like 8 billion cell phones in your pocket that are basically 8 billion supercomputers. So today we have more phones than humans on the planet, and they're basically supercomputers, right? You look into them and you can swipe a piece of glass and talk to somebody on the other side of the planet. You could type 120, 140 characters and foment a revolution. Like, we have done a lot to climb this mountain, right? And so we're right at the top of that mountain. But here's the thing that happens when you do mountain climbing. A lot of times you get to the top of the mountain and you find there's a bigger hill. There's a larger peak just over the horizon. And that's trillions. And this isn't 50 years away, this isn't 20 years away, this isn't 10 years away, this is 5 years away. So in 2010, the world made 10 billion microprocessors in 1 year, and we made more transistors than grains of rice, and we made them cheaper. This is just an economic reality. We're putting chips in things because it's a heck of a lot cheaper than putting electromechanical gear. So this is coming. And when we talk about trillions, it's like very easy for us to replace the B with billion and the TR with trillion and go, it's kind of the same. But it's not the same. So someone who was really smart taught me how to think about trillions. They said, count back in seconds. So count back in seconds, 1,000,000 seconds. How far back is 1,000,000 seconds from right now? Try to guess. Like a week and a half. That's not bad. Okay, how far back is 1,000,000,000 seconds? I want everyone to try to guess. Do not shout it out. Just think in your head, how far back is 1,000,000,000 seconds? We know a week and a half is about 1,000,000 seconds. Just pick a number. How far back is 1,000,000,000 seconds? Computer? Yeah, it's about 80s, the 1980s, right? I mean, we dressed better. That's good news. We had great music back then, if anybody remembers it. Yes? No. So great, 1980. So a week and a half is 1,000,000, a billion's the 1980s. Okay, in your head, try to figure out how far back's the trillion seconds. Don't shout it out. Just pick a number. You don't follow directions very well, my friend. But you're adorable nonetheless. So let's take a look. 1,500, 180, 10,000. You don't go to Stanford for nothing. It's about 30,000 years ago. Yeah, so a trillion seconds is 30,000 years ago. We were living in caves. We were trying to get dogs to like us because we've been kicked out by our wives. Right? So keep this in mind. Now, so that's what's coming, and it's a done deal. It's happening. It's an economic certainty. There's inertia behind this, and it's a lot closer than you think. And depending on who you are, whether you're Cisco or IBM or someone else, you vary the numbers to scare you differently, but basically it's all coming. And it's coming a lot faster than you think. And today, information is in computers. You kind of look into the screen, you see the desktop, you look into your phone, and you see your apps. But that's just like a trillion computing supersaturated solution, right? It's not even that big a deal to have a trillion computers as long as they're not connected. But here's the thing. Intel's working on this thing called Rosepoint, and other people are working on it as well, that make wireless connectivity part of the silicon, which means suddenly wireless connectivity joins Moore's law and becomes cheap as dirt. So suddenly, the seed called connectivity is going to hit the supersaturated solution, and it's going to turn the sock inside out, and it's not going to be information in computers, it's going to be us in the information. We will be in the flow of information. And it's not a trillion $1 bills. I think this is where people also get confused. $1 trillion $1 bills, I mean, we've been coping with that for a long time with our budget, right? With our deficit and things like that. No, it's a trillion things sending 1 billion messages. It's a trillion things getting bad updates. It's a trillion things having malicious intent. Right? So it is a world that I think the history books will call the next information age an era of unbounded, malignant complexity. Now that sounds kind of scary. We actually put all the scary stuff in chapter 3, if you ever read the book. You sort of drink hemlock, have a pity party, and then start reading the rest of the book, which basically says, light your house on fire and run outside for the God's sakes, because there's a big horizon out there, and you are ignoring it right now. Examples of bad things, there's a pacemaker that was taken over at a hacker conference wirelessly. It's a pacemaker that is in people's bodies today. Injected a 900-volt lethal shock and turned into an infection vector, so anyone that walked within 100 feet of the person would also have a 900-volt lethal shock. That's on the market today. There's a Hackaday thing you can download and build into a little whiteboard marker and shove it in the bottom of any Holiday Inn room in America and open up the door. So we are already doing this. LG shipped out a whole bunch of refrigerators that were turned into ThingBots, and the very first example of basically denial of service attacks shutting down people's ability to get on the internet from their own house by the refrigerator in the kitchen. True story. Okay, so that's chapter 3, bad news. There's a ton of amazing steps along the way. And the big deal here is that unlike the current mountain, the web, client server, relational databases, all that stuff that was adorable in the 1970s and 60s when memory was expensive and computing was expensive and networking was expensive, and we needed centralized control for everything because it was the only way we could figure out how to make a buck, it's all changing. Right? The old mountain, which is the one we're on today, we cannot build fire towers to get to the next mountain. We have to climb down. We have to go across the river. We have to go through the forest and climb the other side. The good news is we're fighting over the last few inches at the top of this old mountain called the web. Right? MySpace has to die for Facebook to win. It's not fun anymore. The really good news is anything multiplied by 1 trillion turns out to be kind of fun. Right? There's a lot of money to be made, but it's probably going to mean a lot of incremental, little teeny transactions. A lot of things, buying things and selling things and shaping and sharing the data and capturing all that exhaust and helping us find new insights. It's really hard to think about this stuff. And so one of the chapters that we have is on nature. And it turns out nature is a complex information system in its own right. And nature's been there before. If you think about nature for a second, and I'll probably need like the, can you guys turn on the overhead projector? Yeah, thanks. So nature is a complex information system in its own right? If you actually look at nature, you find some interesting stuff. So think about it. I mean, as humans, we are sort of rank beginners coping with information systems, right? You think about where we are in, let's say, 2010, right? Maybe we could go back to when Claude Shannon invented the theory of information. That was when we were manipulating information. Or maybe we could go back to like when Gutenberg came out with the press. All right, we were like printing things. Yay, team. Or maybe we could go way back to like when we first started doing, forms and shapes and things like that. In the end, maybe tens of thousands of years. But nature's been at it a lot longer. And this is the interesting thing. It's a complex information system humans have been dealing with not so long, but it turns out, and you're going to have to shuffle those. Yeah. Turns out nature's been at it for a long time, right? So nature's been at this for estimates right now as life started about 3 billion years ago. So there's stuff we can learn from there. And we can't necessarily just take the learning. We have to like think of it as patterns and ideas. And the way that nature works is interesting, right? You've got protons and neutrons and electrons that make atoms, that make molecules, that make cells, that make organs, that make me. If we're lucky, it makes you. And these are all layers of meta-ness, right? And they are all layers of complexity and abstraction. This is called layered semantics. Right? Simple things are simple and complex things can be possible, and there's stable layers where the layer below does not need to know how it's going to be used for the layer above and vice versa. So that's a big deal. So that's layered complexity. And I'll talk about 2 more things, and I think I'm done. So I forgot to mention DNA. So think about DNA. DNA kind of maybe goes in between, molecules and cells. It's this really interesting thing. And it's this idea of containing life and containing life's information, right? So DNA is sort of the way that nature came up with a liquid currency. Every single thing that's alive uses DNA as a currency, right? So all mutating, recombining, replicating, and flowing. This is a pretty big deal when this came about, this idea of being able to trade DNA in sort of an open ledger where there's no central control. This is really exciting. Right? Because it actually led to some amazing things, right? So if you think about it, it supported these episodes like the Cambrian explosion, right? Where these 2 things could get together, and we called it sex, and they could come up with something crazy and amazing and new and interesting and kind of scary sometimes, right? So today, this generative structure also allows us to do things like take goats, combine them transgenically, with other kinds of things like human genes and actually make growth hormone and stuff like that comes out of the milk, right? We just take that for granted. It's because there's only one currency instead of 52. It's because there's this liquidity of information that allows us to change and explore and play with it, right? And so this generativity turns out to be really powerful. So I'll stop right there. I wanted to give you guys a taste, a little bit about what's coming, and think a little bit about what could be when we really open up our eyes and we really climb that next mountain and really think about what happens. So it turns out, maybe I'll leave you with this last thought. I was talking about the old mountain, you know, client-server, the cloud, relational databases and things like that. Okay, nature says no singletons, right? Because, you know, you knock off the singleton and the whole species is gone, right? So what it shows was massive replication without fail. So great, well, Google does that with the cloud, right? I mean, they make lots of copies. They've got servers all over the world. Okay, how many copies is enough? 100 copies is enough for the information that we care about for our children and our grandchildren. Let's make at least 100 copies. 1,000, let's make 1,000 copies. Great. How will we know what to make copies of? Well, maybe it's the important stuff. Okay, so we're gonna have lots of cat videos. 18. Okay, but we got lots of copies, right? No singletons, yay. How many copies are there of Google? Anybody? How many copies of Google? 1, right? So I can kidnap Sergey Brin's niece and maybe have more power than kidnapping a head of state's daughter. That's weird. That's not a really interesting way to organize the world, right? No singletons. We need massive distribution. We need resiliency. We need a lot more things in the future if we're going to do this. Anyway, I'll leave you on that bright note. And let's get going. Thank you very much.